There's no need to point out the growing concern and interest our society has in creating a more inclusive and equitable world for a more diverse group of people. Plus, the pandemic and continued social equity movements are embedding this into our collective values and ethos. But what does it mean to be inclusive? In some ways, it's about creating a world that's usable by all, or to make our environment as convenient to use for anyone regardless of their situation. But sometimes, it's about more democratic decision making where those involved have equal say. Or it's about encouraging more undemocratic processes, where certain specific people have more say about the design than others. It can also be about enhancing the culture of a space, or it's about dismantling it. There's significant variations to how inclusion is defined with different degrees of overlap, and even conflict between the definitions. Thus, this research isn't about redefining inclusion, or even deciding on which definition is most appropriate, because each project is different, and each person involved will always have a different way of framing inclusion, with different degrees of coherence between what they say and what's designed. So, given that inclusion is understood, defined, and engaged with differently from one person, one project, or one feature of the project to the next, how do we even go about projects through inclusion? That is the crux of my PhD, and I want to answer this by looking at the ideas behind the theories and practices of inclusion in design. This suggests that there must be some shared aspects of designing inclusively that can help others start to engage with it, or at least understand by empathizing with past experiences of inclusion, both good and bad. This is done so by critical literature reviews and insight from practicing designers and architects who want to design inclusively, or already do so. The first part is scouting the theoretical landscape for ideas on inclusion in design projects. This came to include a variety of practices and theories, from universal design to supernormal design, feminist, and participatory design. The second part is scouting the practical landscape for the ways in which designers and architects actually engage with inclusion, what they talk about in their design teams, and the challenges they face. Together, they're reflected on and analyzed to find a series of key themes, notions that find their way in the discussions and concerns when thinking about or practicing inclusive design. For instance, marginalization, involvement, and fairness. They manifest as common threads when discussing about inclusion, or pressure points when negotiating the designs. Now, given the current conditions, some methodological creativity was needed to get involved remotely due to lockdowns and the pandemic. But the situation has also added an element to the project, to wonder about what the future of designing and design projects will look like now, especially with inclusion in mind. The series of notions should reflect what's considered when trying to create more inclusive buildings, spaces, and artifacts today. These should help in the future of inclusion by making the experiences of others more accessible, the ideas about inclusion more situated, and the inconsistencies from one definition to another less problematic.